She stood alone in the vast entrance hall of Harrowmere Abbey, still wearing her wedding gown. The ivory silk had grown heavy after hours of ceremony and silence. Footmen extinguished candles in the great chandelier, one by one, leaving her in pools of shadow. Her new husband, Dominic, Duke of Harrowmere, walked past her without a word. His boots struck the marble like a closing door. Not a glance, not a pause. She could smell the cold night air clinging to his coat, and then he was gone through the east corridor, the sound of his footsteps fading into the heavy quiet. Somewhere above stairs, a maid whispered and another shushed her. Lydia Marwood, now Duchess of Harrowmere, stood perfectly still. She had been married 3 hours. The ink on the register was dry. Her husband had not spoken to her since the vows. At the chapel he had looked at her exactly once, and his eyes were the color of winter slate. She had smiled. He had turned away. A housekeeper with a pinched mouth appeared and led her to a dim bedchamber in the north wing, far from the family apartments. The woman did not say, "Your Grace," she said. "This will be your room, madam." Lydia closed the door and pressed her palm against her chest. She did not cry. She had been raised by a father who gambled away their name and a mother who had taught her that tears were a luxury. Instead, she sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the wind rattle the old glass. She was 22 years old. She had married a duke to settle her family's debts. She had hoped foolishly that a marriage of duty might still grow into something gentle, but she had seen his face. That hope had already withered on the vine. The first month she tried. She learned from the cook what dishes the Duke preferred and had them placed on the table every evening. She waited in the dining room, wearing her best gown, the one with seed pearls at the cuffs. The candles burned low. He never came. The footmen removed the plates without comment. She learned to eat alone, the clink of her fork against porcelain the only conversation. She wrote him a short letter, folded neatly, and left it on his study desk. It asked if they might walk the gardens together sometime, so she might learn the paths. She found the letter later, crumpled in the wastebasket, unread. Still, she did not retreat. She stepped into the drawing room when he was there, reading by the fire. She said, "Good evening, Your Grace." He answered without lifting his eyes. "Good evening." Then he turned a page. She stood there for a full minute, the distance between them a wide, frozen sea. At last she curtsied and went upstairs, her cheeks burning but her spine straight. The household noticed. Servants took their cue from the master. When she asked for fresh water, the request was often forgotten. A maid once walked into her room without knocking, saw her at the window, and withdrew with a smirk that was not quite hidden. The housekeeper, Mrs. Thistle, spoke to her in clipped tones, as if Lydia were a distant relative overstaying her welcome. Her only comfort was Bess, a young maid with freckled hands and a quiet voice, who had been assigned to her simply because nobody else wanted the duty. Bess brushed her hair each night and whispered small kindnesses. "The gardens are lovely in spring, ma'am. I could show you the old rose walk." So Lydia began to walk the gardens. It was late autumn and most of the blooms had died, but there was a wild corner near the orchard that no one tended. Tangled sweetbriar, a stone bench half hidden by ivy, the soft rustle of fallen leaves. She went there every day, wrapped in a shawl, and felt something loosen in her chest. In that forgotten patch of earth she could breathe. Then came the evening that broke her. A fever swept through the estate. Lydia fell ill, her body aching and her throat raw. She lay in her cold bed for 3 days, and on the second night she woke to find the Duke standing near the door. He held a candle, its light carved shadows across his face. He was looking at her. Her heart, traitorous and hungry, leaped. He had come, he cared. He said nothing. He simply stood there for a long moment, then left. The next morning, a physician arrived and bled her arm, and the crisis passed. She was weak but mending, and a fragile, luminous hope kindled inside her. Perhaps his coldness was only shyness. Perhaps he did not know how to show concern. 2 days later she crept downstairs, still pale, and past the open door of his study. She heard his voice, low and unguarded, speaking to his steward. "The Duchess is recovering. I made sure a physician attended. I will not have it said that a bride died of neglect under my roof. The scandal would be inconvenient. Inconvenient. She stood in the corridor, one hand braced against the paneled wall, and felt the last of her hope drain away like water into sand. She had been a duty, a potential inconvenience, nothing more. She did not return to her room. She walked out into the cold garden, into her wild corner, and sat on the ivy-covered bench. The sky was the color of pewter. Bess found her there an hour later, shivering, and guided her back inside without a question. That night, Lydia ceased to wait for her husband. She stopped leaving letters. She stopped dressing for dinner. She stopped visiting the drawing room. She ate in a small parlor next to the kitchens, where the cook's assistant would bring her a bowl of soup and a kind nod. She wore plain wool dresses and tied her hair back with a simple ribbon. She began to go into the village. It was a modest place, stone cottages huddled along a stream, a church with a leaning spire, and a foundling home run by a weary widow named Mrs. Aldrich. The home was in disrepair, a leaking roof, bare cupboards, children dressed in rags. Lydia saw them and felt something shift inside her. She had been invisible in the abbey. She had been unwanted. But here there was need, and need was a language she understood. She gave her pin money. She rolled up her sleeves and scrubbed floors. She sat on the floor and taught letters to children who had never held a book. The villagers were wary at first. She was the Duke's wife, after all, but they soon saw the truth. She never spoke of the abbey. She never complained. She simply worked, and her quiet grace won them over. Weeks became months. The foundling home slowly transformed. The roof was patched, donated blankets arrived, and a local carpenter built new cots. Lydia arranged for a young teacher from the next county to come twice a week. She organized a small market stall where the older children sold baked goods to passing travelers, putting coins into a jar for their own future. She was happy, not with the bright, fiery happiness of a bride, but with a steady, quiet warmth that filled the hollow spaces inside her. She no longer winced when servants overlooked her. She no longer counted the hours until her husband might notice her. She had stopped waiting for a love that had never been offered. The Duke noticed the change, but only at the edges. At first, it was small things. The dining room felt larger, emptier, though he could not say why. He would sit alone with his newspaper and find himself listening for a soft footstep that never came. One evening, he asked his steward, "Does the Duchess dine in her chambers?" The steward coughed and said, "I believe she takes her meals in the village, Your Grace." The village, he frowned. He had not given her permission, but he said nothing because to object would require admitting that he thought about her at all. Then, on a cool spring morning, his old friend Everett Sinclair arrived for an extended visit. Lord Everett was everything Dominic was not: warm, easy with laughter, generous with compliments. He was a second son with no title but a comfortable income, and he had a gift for making people feel seen. He had known Dominic since Eton, and he was one of the few people who could tease the Duke without fear of reprisal. At dinner on the first evening, Everett looked around the vast table and said, "Where is your bride, Dominic? I was looking forward to meeting her." Dominic's jaw tightened. "She prefers to keep to herself." "What a pity," Everett said lightly. "A duchess should be seen. It's good for morale." The next day, Everett rode into the village and met her entirely by accident. He found her at the foundling home, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a child on each knee, a picture book open before her. Her hair was slipping from its ribbon and her cheeks were pink from laughter. She looked up, and for a heartbeat she was just a girl, unguarded and bright. Everett bowed with a flourish. "You must be the elusive Duchess. I am Everett Sinclair, a poor vagabond and old friend of your husband." Lydia rose, smoothing her skirt. "I am pleased to meet you, my lord." "Please, just Everett. I'm allergic to formality. And I must say Dominic has been criminally silent about you. May I join you?" He did join her. He helped the children build a tower of wooden blocks that toppled to shrieks of delight. He told silly stories about a pig who wanted to be a racehorse. He made Lydia laugh, a genuine, surprised laugh that she had not heard from herself in many months. When she returned to the Abbey that evening, there was a lightness in her step that had not been there before. Dominic saw her crossing the entrance hall, a smudge of flour on her sleeve, her lips still curved in a half-smile. He stood at the top of the staircase, watching. Something hot and unidentifiable coiled in his chest. She did not look up. She did not notice him at all. She walked to the small parlor and closed the door. The jealousy began that night, though he refused to name it. The following days were a slow, exquisite torment. Everett continued to seek Lydia out. He invited her to ride with him. She accepted. He asked her to play chess in the library. She agreed. He brought her a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy, and she sat by the window reading it, her expression soft and far away. Dominic watched from doorways and corridors. He saw the way his friend leaned toward her, the way his voice dropped when he spoke to her alone. He saw the way Lydia's eyes brightened in Everett's presence, the easy comfort she had found in a man who was not her husband, and it ate at him. One afternoon he strode into the stable yard just as Everett was helping Lydia onto a horse. "I'll join you," he announced, his voice clipped. Everett raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Lydia simply nodded, her expression carefully blank. They rode through the estate, 3 horses on a narrow path, the silence thick as wool. Dominic tried to ride beside his wife, but his horse was too large for the path, and so he had to follow, watching Everett point out a hawk circling overhead and hearing Lydia's quiet laugh. When they returned, he dismissed the groom and helped Lydia dismount himself. His hands closed around her waist, and she stiffened under his touch. He set her down quickly, but not before he caught the flicker of something in her eyes, not fear, not anger, but simple, quiet distance. It was worse than anger. "You spend a great deal of time with my friend," he said, the words harsher than he intended. "He is kind," Lydia replied. "He speaks to me as if I exist." She walked away, leaving him standing in the yard with the reins still in his hands. That evening Dominic found himself in the west corridor outside the small parlor. He could hear Everett's voice from within, low and earnest. "You deserve to be happy, Lydia, not just useful, happy." Dominic's hand curled into a fist. He did not knock. He walked back to his study and sat in the dark for a long time, staring at the cold fireplace. In the days that followed, Lydia grew even more distant. She asked his permission to convert the old disused wing of the Abbey into a proper schoolroom for the village children. She presented her case with calm, careful logic, her voice steady and her gaze fixed somewhere over his shoulder. He granted the request because he did not know how to refuse her, and because some small, buried part of him wanted to give her something she wanted. She moved her personal things into a small set of rooms adjoining the new schoolroom. She no longer slept in the north wing bedchamber. She told the housekeeper, not him. He discovered it when he walked past her old door and found it empty, the wardrobe open and bare. That night he did not sleep. He walked the dark corridors of the Abbey, his footsteps echoing like a ghost's. He found himself in the wild corner of the garden, standing beside the ivy-covered bench. He had never been there before. He sat down and looked up at the stars, and he felt a loss so profound it nearly buckled his knees. He had pushed her away so completely that she had simply vanished, even while living under the same roof. The first emotional reveal came 3 days later, on a wet Thursday afternoon. He was searching his study for a legal document, something about a boundary dispute with a neighboring estate. He pulled open a drawer in the steward's desk, a heavy oak piece that had belonged to the old steward, Mr. Greaves, who had served the family for 40 years and had retired only last month. The drawer was crammed with ledgers and yellowed receipts. At the very back, his fingers brushed against a bundle of papers tied with a faded ribbon. He pulled it out and his breath stopped. They were letters, 5 of them, in a handwriting he did not immediately recognize but which made his pulse quicken. He untied the ribbon and opened the first one. My dear husband, I do not know if I may call you that, but I hope you will allow me in time. I write this with a trembling hand, because I am not brave enough to speak these words aloud. I watched you today from the window. You were walking across the courtyard, and the wind caught your coat, and I thought. He read it. He read all of them. They were dated in the earliest weeks of their marriage. Each letter was a small, quiet gift, a description of a walk she had taken, a pressed flower, a poem she had loved as a child. One asked if he might teach her to play chess because she had always wanted to learn. Another said simply, I hope you are warm. I hope you are well. I hope one day you might look at me and not look away. His hands were shaking. The dates proved they had been written before her illness, before the night she had stopped trying. Greaves must have intercepted them. Greaves, who had always resented the marriage, who had muttered that the Duke had lowered himself by wedding a bankrupt baron's daughter. Greaves had hidden them, stolen them, and left them here, buried in a drawer, while Lydia had waited for an answer that would never come. Dominic pressed his fist to his mouth. A sound escaped him, raw and jagged. He thought of her sitting alone in the dining room night after night. He thought of the letter he himself had crumpled into the wastebasket. He had done that. Greaves had stolen her words, but he, Dominic, had stolen her hope. He dismissed Greaves formally, though the old man was already retired, and the letter he sent was cold and final. Then he sat in his study with the letters spread before him and read them again, and again, until the light failed and the room was dark. A fortnight later, the storm came. It was a wild autumn gale that ripped branches from the ancient oaks and sent the river surging over its banks. Lydia had been at the foundling home when the worst of it hit. She had sent the children home to their foster families and had stayed behind to secure the shutters and move the stores to higher ground. Bess had come with her, and together they fought through the howling wind to reach a small stone cottage on the edge of the village, a place Lydia used as a storeroom for the school supplies. They were safe there, though the roof groaned and water seeped under the door. Bess curled up on a pile of blankets, exhausted, and Lydia sat by the fire, watching the flames twist in the draft. It was the same cottage, the same hearth, the same worn flagstones. 6 years ago she had been a girl of 16, traveling home from a visit to an elderly aunt. A sudden storm had stranded her carriage, and she had taken shelter in this very cottage. A young man had been there, half frozen, his horse lost somewhere on the moor. He had been pale and shaking, his fine clothes ruined, his hands bleeding. She had wrapped him in her own cloak. She had fed him bread and cheese from her basket. They had sat by this fire, talking through the long night, about his travels, his love of old books, his loneliness in a great house he did not yet feel ready to inherit. She had told him about her father's debts and her mother's quiet sorrow, and for a few hours they had been two souls stripped of names and titles. When dawn came, the storm had passed and a search party had found them. Before he left, he had pressed a small silver locket into her palm. "If you ever need anything," he had said, his eyes intense and young, "send this to me. I will find you." He had never told her his name. She had opened the locket later and found a tiny engraved crest, a falcon above a crown. She had recognized it at once. The Duke of Harrowmere's heir. She had never sent the locket. She had been too proud and later, too embarrassed to trade on an old act of kindness. And then 3 years later, her father had arranged her marriage to that very heir. She had walked up the aisle of the chapel and seen the face of the stranger from the cottage. Her heart had burst with terrified joy. She had thought, he will remember. He must remember. But he had looked at her with ice, not recognition. And so she had hidden the locket under her gown, next to her skin, and had never spoken of it. Now in the same cottage, she pulled the locket from beneath her collar and held it tight. The fire cracked. Bess slept. The wind screamed. The door burst open. Dominic stood in the doorway, drenched, his greatcoat plastered to his body, his face white with terror. He had ridden through the storm, searching for her. Every possible disaster had clawed at his mind during that frantic ride. A fallen tree, a swollen stream, her body broken and cold. He had nearly lost his mind with the fear of it. He saw her, and the relief was so violent he had to grip the doorframe to keep from falling. Lydia. She rose slowly. The firelight caught the locket and the silver flashed. He saw it, his eyes fixed on the tiny oval in her hand, and the whole world seemed to tilt and rearrange itself. He took a step forward. "Where did you get that?" She did not try to hide it. There was no point now. "A stranger gave it to me many years ago, in this cottage, during a storm like this one." He stared at her, and she watched the realization move across his face like dawn breaking, first confusion, then a dawning, impossible hope, then a horror that hollowed his cheeks. He looked at the hearth, at the flagged stones, at her. "It was you," he whispered. "All this time it was you." "Yes." "You knew," he said, his voice cracking. "On our wedding day you knew." "I knew. I thought you would remember. When you didn't, I thought you were ashamed of that night, or that it had meant nothing to you. I did not want to trap you with an old debt. I wanted you to care for me because you chose to, but you never did." He made a sound that was half groan, half sob, and he went to his knees before her. The Duke of Harrowmere, who had never bent to any man, knelt on the cold stone floor with water pooling around him, and his face wet with rain and tears. "I have been searching for the girl in the storm since I was 22 years old," he said, his voice breaking apart. "I dreamed of her. I told myself that if I ever found her, I would never let coldness or duty steal me away. I thought she was the only one who had ever seen me truly. And all this time, Lydia, all this time, you were under my own roof, and I treated you like a ghost. I looked past you. I let others look past you. I'm the greatest fool who ever drew breath." She was crying now, silently, the tears slipping down her cheeks. "I stopped hopping," she said. "I had to stop because the hopping was breaking me." "I know," he said. "I know, and I have no right to ask you to hope again. But I am asking. I am begging. I loved you before I knew your name. I loved you in a storm, and I lost you in the silence of my own house. Let me try to find you again, please." The word hung in the air between them. The fire popped. Bess stirred in her sleep, then settled. Lydia looked at him, at this proud, cold man, shattered and kneeling, his heart laid bare at last. She thought of the letters he had never received. She thought of the empty dining room and the ivy-covered bench. She thought of the children in the village who called her Lady Bright and the schoolroom she had built with her own hands. She was not the same girl who had waited for him in a wedding gown. She was someone new, someone who could stand without his love. But standing beside it, if he truly offered it, was a different kind of strength. "I don't know if I can," she said honestly. "I don't know if I can open that door again." "Then let me wait outside it," he said. "I'll wait as long as it takes." The storm raged on, but inside the cottage, a fragile, trembling peace settled. He did not try to touch her. He simply stayed, dripping and exhausted, and after a long silence she pushed a dry blanket toward him with her foot. He took it, and a ghost of a smile crossed his lips. They returned to the abbey in the gray morning light. The world was washed clean, branches down but the air sweet. He walked beside her horse, leading it himself, and the servants who rushed out to meet them stopped in astonishment at the sight of the Duke on foot, his eyes red-rimmed, his hand resting on the Duchess's bridle as if it were the most precious thing in the world. The healing did not come all at once. Love that has been starved for years cannot feast in a day. Dominic did not rush her. He did not demand forgiveness. He simply showed up again and again in small, steady ways. He ordered the north wing room stripped and redone with the finest furnishings, but he did not tell her she must sleep there. He left a single rose on her schoolroom desk each morning. He attended the Foundling Homes market stall and bought a dozen biscuits with his own coins, standing awkwardly among the villagers. And when the children laughed at his stiff manner, he laughed too, a rusty, surprised sound. He asked her to walk with him in the gardens, and when she hesitated, he said, "The old rose walk, I've never seen it properly. Bess told me you love it." She went. They walked in silence, but it was a companionable silence, not the frozen silence of before. He pointed out the tangled sweetbriar, and she told him how she had pruned it herself last spring. He listened as if every word were a treasure. One evening, he sat with her in the small parlor and read aloud the letter she had written years ago. His voice stumbled over the tender phrases, and when he finished the last one, he looked at her with eyes that glistened. "I would have answered every one," he said. "I want you to know that. If I had seen them, I would have answered." "I know now," she said softly. "Grieve stole them, you did not. But I stole your hope in other ways. I was blind and proud and afraid of feeling anything. I used coldness as a shield, and you paid the price." "I paid it," she agreed, "but I am no longer a debtor, neither are you." He reached across the small table and very slowly covered her hand with his. She did not pull away. His fingers were warm and they trembled slightly. She turned her palm up and their fingers laced together. It was the first voluntary touch she had given him, and he closed his eyes as if it hurt, as if it healed. The schoolroom flourished. Dominic formally endowed it, providing a permanent teacher and a hot meal each day for every child. The village celebrated, and at the small gathering he stood and raised a glass. "To my wife," he said, and his voice carried across the room, clear and unashamed. "The truest heart I have ever known. She built this place out of her own kindness while I was too blind to see it. I am grateful beyond words that she did not give up on the world, even when she gave up on me." Lydia's cheeks flushed, but she met his eyes and held them. The villagers cheered. Everett, who had stayed on and become a loyal friend to them both, grinned and nudged her shoulder. "Well, Duchess, it seems he's finally learned to use his words." That night, under a sky dusted with stars, they stood together on the terrace. The scent of roses drifted from the restored garden. He turned to her, and there was none of the old ice in his expression, only a raw, tender vulnerability that made him look younger and softer and entirely hers. "I searched for a girl in a storm," he said quietly. "I found a woman who built her own light, and I think I've loved you across 2 different lives without even knowing it. Will you let me spend the rest of this one proving it?" She stepped into his embrace, pressing her cheek to his chest, hearing the steady, strong beat of his heart. "Yes," she whispered. "You found me, I'm here." He held her as if she were made of spun glass and iron together. The moonlight washed over them, and Harrowmere Abbey, which had been a house of echoes, became, at last, a home. In the years that followed, the villagers would tell the story of the Duchess of Harrowmere and her foundling school, and how the cold Duke had been melted by a storm and a locket. They would speak of her grace and his devotion, and how love, even when it had been buried deep, could still find the sun. And Lydia, walking hand in hand with her husband through the Rose Walk each evening, knew that the story was not about a locket, or a storm, or a bundle of lost letters. It was about a woman who had learned to stand alone, and a man who had learned to kneel. And that was the love they had earned, quiet, strong, and unbreakable.